Can honesty be taught? Perhaps there's no better place able to answer this question than the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where the honor code, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do, is deeply ingrained into cadets from the moment they enter. Bernard Banks is the former general manager of the Department of Leadership Development at West Point and Associate Dean of Leadership Development and Inclusion at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. In this episode of Moments of Truth, I speak with Bernard about the importance of teaching honesty to our future leaders. Take a listen. Your track record of accomplishments is incredibly impressive. I think you have the most impressive collection of master's degrees I've ever seen in my life. It really is impressive, and you've obviously been a scholar of leadership for a very long time in many ways. So I'm grateful to have my readers and folks be able to learn from you. Listening to one interview you did about the Cadet Honor Code, which says, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. You talked about the fact that those characteristics couldn't be presumed to be present, that they actually had to be instilled in people. One of the biggest findings in our research about honesty was that honesty is not just a character trait, it's a muscle. It actually has to be built, you have to be good at it, and continually learned. So I'm curious to you talk about, how does one continue to learn those traits of honor, of not lie, cheat, or steal? How do you work at that to build a muscle?
So James Lang theory is a short answer. Mm-hmm. So James Lang theory says that behavioral change precedes attitudinal change. Mm-hmm. And so what happens many times, you throw somebody to an environment and you say, from this point forward, be honest. And then you hope that pronouncement compels action. James Lang theory says that's not the way human beings behave. They're conditioned. And so it says you mandate behavior, you hold people accountable for exercising that behavior. As they start to accrue positive benefits, they come to adopt the belief associated with the behavior. Mm. And so if we take this to West Point, we take great care in terms of who we select to serve on the staff and faculty. And regardless of what somebody's role is there, so if they're a chemistry teacher or an English teacher or whatever else, they know that their primary job is leader developer. And so the example they set on a daily basis and the behavior that they provide feedback on plays an indispensable role in the formation of the character of each of the young charges at West Point. Mm-hmm. So we're very clear about these are the behaviors we expect. When you adhere to it, great. We're going to tell you, awesome. That's exactly what we expect. If you stray from that, we're going to tell you, that's not what we expect. Here's why that's not good. Here's what will happen if you continue to persist in this behavior. So it all comes down to accountability. If you go back to like looking at Bregman's work, first one starts with clear expectation. So clear expectations, clear capability, clear measurement, clear feedback, clear consequence. At West Point, you can pass all your classes and get thrown out of the place for simply having used a fake ID card. Mm. Other schools don't have that kind of consequence associated with moral, ethical development. But at West Point, they do. So at West Point, it all comes down to codifying behavior, holding people accountable for the behavior. And if they do it long enough and they start to accrue enough positive benefits, then they come to adopt the belief that honesty is important. But it is, to your point, a muscle that has to be continually worked on. If they depart West Point and they leave the ivory tower and then they go into a world and they see people lying and cheating all around them, they can most certainly slip. And we've seen that.
Yep. The rules of the honor code, the rules of thumb under it, I love. There's these 3 questions that I want you to talk about. Does this action attempt to deceive anyone or allow anyone to be deceived? Does this action gain or allow the gain of privilege or advantage to which I or someone else would not otherwise be entitled? And would I be satisfied with the outcome of this if I were on the receiving end of this action? I love that last one. There seems to be this interesting thread of empathy woven into those questions. Like think about other people. Talk about how these questions help reinforce the honor code, how they help people personalize the need to be honest and just.
Well, West Point exists to produce leaders. And if we think about trust as the cornerstone of leadership, once you can no longer be trusted, it fundamentally undermines your ability to be influential in a positive way. And so those questions all get at, as a result of my actions, will I lose the ability to be viewed as a trusted agent and thus compromise my effectiveness as a leader?
So one of the findings in our research was the fact that, what we call strategic clarity. If you are you who you say you are, and when organizations are seen to be, their actions and words match. We say we value this. We say strategically we are this. We say our purpose is this. When employees actually believe that to be true, when they see the congruence there, you're 3 times more likely to have people tell you the truth, be honest, and behave justly. But when you're seen to be to have a gap, in other words, when you institutionalize duplicity, when we say one thing here but do another, you're 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and steal. In that case,
Yep.
one of the
So
things
here's how we highlight that. I'm like, listen, I want your say-do ratio to be 1-to-1, 1-to-1 congruence. That what you say is what you do. Because if you merely do that, if your say-do ratio is 1-to-1, you won't be viewed as ordinary. You'll be viewed as extraordinary, because so few people can achieve that simple standard.
why do you think leaders or organizations struggle with the notion that you have to measure both, that you have to actually be able to, the consistency between what and how, between who you say you are and what you do?
Because how they're incentivized
Mm.
is all geared around the one and not the other.
Yeah. One of our other findings was when people perceive accountability to be unfair, when the way I'm being measured for what I contribute is not consistent with what I actually believe happened, you're 4 times more likely to have people lie or cheat or withhold the truth or behave unjustly. One of the things I think that's problematic in many of our accountability systems is that we've just dehumanized them, right? We've taken dignity and justice out of the process, and it's become a process of accounting. You use the metaphor of failure being a critical part of learning, that we have to do. You even talked about we actually tear muscles on purpose to build them up. Talk about, as part of our accountability processes, why is being able to learn from failure and talk openly about it so important?
One, we don't view it as part of success criteria. People want to share those things that they believe are going to portray them as being successful. Try as you may, the word failure doesn't have a positive connotation associated with it. That's why what I've tried to personally do in my organizations is eliminate the word and replace it with the words that do have a positive connotation, like a learning trial. Same thing with the word problem. Problem doesn't have a positive connotation. Challenge does. A challenge is something, you get energized by. You want to overcome. There's an opportunity associated with it. A learning trial, that opportunity to have a moment where you might grow and learn something new, as opposed to failure, which always just leads back to, I wasn't able to get it done. So many times the language we employ creates a whole set of externalities that we're not even cognizant of, because we're not thinking intently around how that word is serving us.
If you felt like, if you were looking at an accountability process that had at its core dignity and justice, that really were measuring the right things, what would you see in it?
That people would tout their adherence to standards, not try to run away from standards. If you take a look at what makes special operations special in the military, it's not that they have, super soldiers or, the gee whiz weapons. It's that they're more accountable to the basics than anyone else. The basics are, so what I found in organizations that excel at the basics are the most high performing organizations. They know they're blocking and tackling. They're accountable because they simplify standards. They encourage introspection so that they can foster learning. They communicate effectively across the organization, and they think in sustainable terms about what they can do short and long term. I say organizations are characterized by one of three things. They're accountable, partially accountable, or unaccountable. If they're unaccountable, they don't stay in business long. Right. Partial accountability, if they're accountable for the things that move the needle the most, and some other stuff that doesn't, they let slide, they're able to get away with it so long as, the environment allows that to transpire. But at some point, that partial accountability is going to catch up to them because something they need to be accountable on, they're not. The ground is shifted beneath their feet. And because they aren't accountable, they can't contend with the shift. Then you have extraordinary organizations where the say-do ratio is 1-to-1. The lived experience is exactly as promised. And the reason all this transpires is because most organizations, if they can find some kind of competitive advantage for a while based on what's transpiring in the environment, get away with being partially accountable.
And what do you typically find that it takes? How would you help somebody get from partial to full accountability?
It takes a deep examination of where are the gaps between what we say we're committed to pursuing and what we're actually pursuing. Where are we underwriting mediocrity? Where are we losing resources and value that we know going forward we have to seize? It starts with a deep examination of who we are, what's going on, what accounts for our behavior, and measuring that against who you say you want to be, how you say you want to perform, and what will it take to behave that way. And when you then can, in a rigorous way, identify the gap, then the question simply becomes, how important is it for you to close that gap?
When you think about, as you've watched cadets come through the years under the code, when you think about other than being under the influence of the code and the accountability things, are there things you've seen leaders do that help them sort of create the learning flywheel of staying honest, staying, telling the truth, not cheating, not stealing, but keeping their moral ethic code and the capabilities to be that, to speak the truth, to call out others and not tolerate that? Are there things you've seen work particularly effectively that allow leaders to stay on that learning journey, regardless of what the environments around them are doing?
I most certainly believe the most powerful thing is the manner in which those around them live their lives.
So the company they keep.
The company they keep, absolutely. So if they see the staff and faculty engaged in the behaviors that they're extolling the virtues of, if they see the courageous peer who has the wherewithal to hold someone accountable and stand in the face of adversity, and then later they see that individual being praised for their courage. If they see the impact of what happens when someone has a major breach of integrity and ask themselves, am I willing to pay that price? It's the combination. Lewin says that behavior is a function of the person and their interaction with their environment. So one, you have to find people whose beliefs are highly correlated with the beliefs of West Point. So if you don't believe, at some level in the importance of honesty, coming to West Point is the absolute wrong thing for you. So you got to find people who already are predisposed to want to believe in these things. And then you have to immerse them in an environment that demands they adhere to these things. And it's the interplay of the two, what the environment is demanding and what the person is seeking, that creates the behavior that you're looking for. And so when we're going to say, we want honest people in our company, I'm like, great. What's your culture look like? And what kind of people are you attracting? I have a friend who once told me to look for three things when they hire somebody: someone who's smart, someone who's honest, someone who's smart, someone who's driven, and someone who's principled. Whatever you do, don't hire someone who's high on the first two and lacks the third, because a smart person who's driven will quickly drive you out of business if they don't believe in the right things.
Yep.
And, so the reality is most companies don't do sufficient due diligence on character.
Right.
They simply look at the absence of something and assume that that's the presence of something.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. The conditions just might not have arisen to reveal the true nature of one's character.
Right.
And so, what kind of, follow-ups do they do with people? So one of the things we do in the Army when doing a security check to get your clearance is they say, give us 3 names of people you know. And they go to those 3 people and they go, all right, give us the names of 3 other people who know this person. They go to those 3. And then they go to those 3 and say, give us names. So that by the time they get to that 3rd level, you can't guess who they're talking to.
Right.
And then they're asking those people very pointed questions designed to ascertain your character. Most companies, they take a look, they have positive recommendations, and they don't go anywhere beyond that.
Yeah.
Yep, nothing negative here, driving on. and they basically hope that the law is going to be a sufficient governor.
Bernie, this has been absolutely fabulous. Your insights and how well you share them are wonderful. I'm grateful for your thoughts and time, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you take care. Ever been in a room where it looked like everyone was agreeing just to agree, even when they didn't? Well, you're not alone if you've experienced this phenomenon called groupthink. In this episode of Voices, Khalil Smith is joined by Jay Van Bavel, Associate Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at New York University and Director of the NYU Social Identity and Morality Lab. In their conversation, they help us understand why the social environment matters when creating the condition for people to speak up, and how that helps avoid groupthink. And importantly, Jay gives Khalil the okay to get a pet goat. Listen in.
So Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to just kind of chat and connect. As I have said about many of the people that I've had the fortune of talking to, I learn a ton from you every time I have the opportunity to chat with you. So I was just looking forward to kind of bringing a bunch of your wisdom and your insights to a bunch of other people as well, and letting them in on some of the conversations that we tend to have. And the topic will be all about kind of speaking up and voice and creating that for others and finding it for yourself. But first, I'd love to maybe just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself a little bit so folks know who they're hearing from.
Thanks, Khalil. My name is Jay Van Bavel. I'm an associate professor of psychology and neuroscience at NYU.
Amazing.
I study the psychology of groups, essentially.
Yes, and that is something I've leaned on you a lot for. So anybody who's not following you on Twitter already, I will make sure to add it in, because I constantly am liking and retweeting all sorts of stuff you put out there, because it is super valuable for leaders in any capacity just to kind of understand the group dynamics that you study and make so accessible on a regular basis. So thank you for that, in addition to a lot of other things.
Thank you.
So first and foremost, would just love for you to maybe kind of talk about how do you think about speaking up or voice or just kind of that dynamic as a whole? Because that'll be what we really revolve our conversation around. And it's just been fascinating to hear different perspectives from different folks in terms of the way they think about it.
Yeah, I think of speaking up or voice as an issue of where you have something useful to share. And so that could be that you have a perspective that's different from somebody else. It might be something that's highly moralized or ethical, that you see something going wrong and you feel like you need to speak up. So it can be a range of things. And then the way I study it and think of it through the lens of psychology is that we live in a society or set of cultures, and they can often impose on us in ways that prevent us from speaking up, because we might feel fear of saying the wrong thing, of looking dumb, of having somebody in power retaliate against us, have somebody insulting us, or just making a mistake or having the wrong perception. And so there's so many barriers that we have in terms of our capacity to speak up about various things.
Jay, I feel very seen right now when you talk about like fear of looking dumb or fear of saying the wrong thing. So hopefully you will give me some insights around things that I can do or think about. So, you as somebody that is constantly, whether it's communicating to your students, communicating through interviews, communicating through your writing, like you are constantly putting your ideas out there. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you approach speaking up? And is it something that comes pretty naturally for you, or is it something that you feel like you've had to work at or continue to work at?
I mean, I am an extrovert, and so it's easier for me to say something to someone just in general, because I love people, I love talking, I love sharing ideas, I love that stimulation. But I would say, of course, in my life, there's been many moments that I remember where it felt really hard to speak up, where you felt like the dumbest person in a conversation or in a room, or non-expert. In science, there's a common discussion around imposter syndrome, that once you get admitted to a graduate program, you might have been, a big fish in a small pond before, but suddenly you're surrounded by people who know more than you. And my life just feels like I'm going from one situation to another of rooms full of people who know more than me on some dimension. And so eventually you just like get comfortable with not knowing everything, and just kind of like lean into the opportunity for growth and learning from people.
Now, Jay, was there a particular moment that you feel like you got comfortable with not knowing everything? Like, is there a thing that sticks out, or is it just kind of gradual over a period of time as you're in more and more of those rooms? You're just like, oh, okay, I guess this is my new norm. I should acclimate.
Yeah, I feel like every time I left my comfort zone, I went through that experience of being quiet. So I grew up in a really small town, far in northern Alberta in Canada. When I remember going to university, and it was overwhelming, and I probably didn't raise my hand to talk in class for like at least a year or longer. And so and then I went to do my PhD, and I felt the same way. And so I kind of feel like it's taken me a while, probably since I've been about 30 years old, where I'm just generally comfortable speaking up in almost any situation now. But, it takes a while to develop that comfort with yourself. It also helps, obviously, to have succeeded in different environments. If you're new to a challenging environment, then it's going to be really daunting just because you don't have that sense of self-confidence, or you haven't failed enough to be comfortable with failure. I think that might be part of it too.
Yeah. Now, Jay, I've also seen, and again, back to kind of the things that I've seen you communicate on Twitter, is you've talked a lot about, as you get into a graduate program, finding a great mentor is incredibly important. And so I'm curious to understand, like, what are some of the things that you've done in your lab or with people that are looking up to you to create that environment and to make it easier so that you don't have to quite get to 30 before you feel more comfortable speaking up?
Yeah. So as I said, I'm a social psychologist, which means I study how people interact in social environments. And it turns out the social environment matters a lot for people's willingness to speak out. And so I do research on things like group decision-making, group interactions, groupthink. And so I try to use the science that I'm reading about and studying in my own behavior and how I run my own lab. So I have a lot of little tricks that I've learned from that literature, understanding what goes wrong that causes groupthink or makes people feel silenced. And one of them, for example, is that when I'm running a lab meeting, I'm the most powerful person in the room. And I recognize that. And so if we have a guest speaker or we're discussing a paper, I try to speak last if I can, or at least share my opinion last. And so that way people don't feel pressure to conform to what I'm saying. And it turns out it's great because I get a ton of opinions. And when guest speakers come to my lab, they often mention to me after, you have a really vibrant group. They all ask questions and jump in, and they're critical, but in a friendly way, which is kind of that. There's always like that. It's an art, I think, to create an environment like that, and also to be in that environment and ask good questions, because you want an environment that's critical and where people are challenging one another, but you want them to do it in a way that's friendly and constructive. And so in the psychology research, organizational research, we call that psychological safety. Psychological safety in the news, unfortunately, is framed as you need like to go to a quiet room or have a pet goat that you pet because you're upset. What it really means is that you're comfortable challenging someone in your environment, and it means they're not going to like not invite you back to the meeting, or like suddenly they throw like invite everybody out for drinks after work except for you. And so or they're going to humiliate you if you say something wrong. And so what I try to do is create an environment where people can also challenge me and try to be as non-defensive as I can, to not only model that, but also signal this is a safe place, because I want to get the best ideas on the back end of this. And so I regularly put anytime I'm working on a paper, which is really the currency of science, before I submit it to a journal where it's going to get torn apart by anonymous reviewers, I always crowdsource it. So I send it to all my lab, and we have a lab meeting where they pick it apart and say all the problems with it. And so I would rather get that criticism in-house rather than send it out and have it rejected, because someone's going to find those same holes in it. I'd rather it be us and make the work stronger. So that's kind of I try to lean in and have a lot of, basically what I'm trying to say is I have a lot of processes in how I run my team that bake in kind of the what I think is the best practices around the science of promoting good group decision-making and avoiding things like groupthink and conformity.
That's awesome. All right, final question, and I'm going to let you get back to all the incredible research that you're doing, because I am gobbling it up. As much of it as I can understand, I gobble up. If you could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden either give us more of something or take something away that you felt like would create more of an environment where we were all better at speaking up, or it was just easier to do, what would that thing be? What do you want to see more or less of out of all of us?
Yeah, the one thing I'm studying in the lab now, and it turns out to be a real kind of magic ingredient for a lot of good elements of good group decision-making, is intellectual humility. And so intellectual humility means, for all of us, including me, like I need to embrace this when I do my work and in life, is that accepting that you might not be right and that you have something to learn from everybody. And when you accept that, you have an open-minded kind of approach to life. And we're finding that it has all kinds of great elements. So we're studying this, for example, around the world during the COVID pandemic right now. And it's not just that, when I talk about open-mindedness, people often say, well, if your mind's too open, you'll absorb all kinds of crazy ideas that are just bad. And it turns out people who are high on intellectual humility don't just make good decisions about themselves and about others around COVID, but they seem to be particularly skeptical about things like conspiracy theories. And so it has this great capacity to kind of sort through all the evidence, evaluate it, and figure out what seems to be most accurate. And so that would be the type of mindset and culture and attitude I'd want to endorse in people, is that just the idea that you don't know it all. You should listen to people. You don't have to agree with them, but you want to hear them out and then reflect on it and evaluate it, and then update your thinking as you go.
Love it. Oh my gosh, Jay, thank you as always for the time. I look forward to reading everything you're going to put out about intellectual humility and figuring out how I can, maybe I don't know everything, but we'll see. We'll leave that for others to determine.
That's what these interviews are for.
Exactly. Jay, thank you. And I will chat with you very soon, my friend. Thanks for letting everybody into our conversation.
Nice to meet everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Jay. Bye.
Each of us has circumstances that tempt us to self-silence. Conflicts we avoid, personality types we wither around, certain risks that make us especially afraid. And in these moments, we cower. But that forfeiture of our voice has a cost beyond our own missed opportunity. Those we lead are watching. Our friends and children are watching. At the critical junctures where our voices are most needed, it looks like we condone silence. Inventory the places that bring you to silence. Determine why, and put strategies in place that will bolster your courage to speak. Under what conditions do you avoid hard conversations? Where do you shrink back from moments requiring courage? As you think back on such moments, what does your avoidance cost you? Till next time, keep leaning into your moments of truth so that you can be the example of what it means to be honest.